What would you do if your child was gasping for air and the only people who could help had just thrown you out like trash? In a town where reputation is currency and silence is survival, one mother was framed, cast out, and left to die under the desert sun. But when a reclusive rancher, haunted by his own buried grief, stops to help, everything changes. What links a tragic car crash, a forged will, and a forgotten recipe book? And how far would you go to protect the only thing that still matters? This isn't just a story about survival. It's about reclaiming truth, building love from ashes, and uncovering a secret so deep it nearly destroyed a family twice. If you believe that truth deserves a voice and every mother has the right to fight for her child, subscribe to our channel now and share this story with someone who still believes in redemption. And tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed injustice so cruel it changed how you see the world? We want to hear your story, because sometimes speaking up is the beginning of healing. The Thatcher estate sat like a monument to power, cold marble, silent hallways, and windows that never let in the light. Mara Ellison stood in the drawing room, her hands trembling as she held her late husband's will. Judith Thatcher, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, lounged on the velvet chaise like a queen before an execution. Percy stood at the window, back turned, spinning his father's old gold pen between his fingers. "You were never family, Mara," Judith said with quiet venom. "You were convenience, an accident Charles never had the decency to correct." Mara gripped the paper tighter. "I didn't kill him, you know that, but the town doesn't," Percy said, finally turning around, his smile snake smooth. "And they believe what we tell them." Judith slid a folder across the table. "Sign away custody. You'll walk out with your dignity. Keep fighting, and I'll make sure you leave with nothing. I'd rather sleep on the dirt than let you take Luca." Judith's eyes narrowed. "Then you'd better get used to the dust." An hour later, Mara and her son Luca were shoved out the gate. Her knees scraped against gravel as she caught herself. Luca, clutching a threadbare bag, tried to be brave, but his small hand trembled in hers. They had nowhere to go. The sun over Juniper Hollow was a merciless god. Heat waves shimmered across the highway as Mara and Luca walked mile after mile, each step slower than the last. Their water bottle was nearly empty. Luca's breathing grew ragged, wheezy. "Just a little farther," Mara whispered, but her lips were cracked and dry. Luca stumbled. "Mom!" He fell, coughing violently. "No, no, no!" She knelt beside him, shielding him from the sun with her body. He was burning up. She lifted her eyes to the sky. No clouds, no mercy. "Please," she whispered. "Someone, anyone." Cars passed. No one stopped. She laid beside her son, curling around him, whispering stories of the sea they'd never seen, of stars they'd wish on if night ever came. Then she heard it, the low, slow rumble of a truck. Reed Ashford almost didn't stop. He never did. The world was filled with problems he'd long since quit solving, but something in the way that figure curled on the side of the road, something about the way the boy's hand clung to the woman's dress. He slammed on the brakes. Dust swirled as he stepped out, weathered boots hitting the hot asphalt. Mara looked up, shielding her eyes. "I've got water," he said, his voice low, steady. "I won't come closer unless you want me to." She said nothing. He crouched, opened a bottle, and placed it on the ground, then stepped back. Mara stared, then crawled to the bottle and helped Luca sip. Her hands shook. "You have a car?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Reed nodded. "Then please, help us." Reed's truck smelled of leather and antiseptic. Luca lay across the back seat, head in Mara's lap. Reed kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. "I've got a friend, Doc Avery, retired Army medic. He still makes house calls." Mara nodded. "Thank you. I don't ask questions," Reed added. She looked at him, really looked. Broad shoulders, wrinkled shirt, grief in his silence. In the passenger mirror, she caught a glimpse of a photo taped to the visor. Woman, child, smiles framed by tragedy. Mara said nothing more. The ranch was quiet, save for the wind rustling through the dry grass. Reed carried Luca into a guest room. Doc Avery arrived within the hour, nodding approval at Mara's field care. "He'll be okay," Doc said. "You did good." Mara sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on her son. Reed watched from the doorway. On the nightstand, a note in Reed's handwriting, "Rest, don't worry." Mara broke down then, not from fear, but relief. In the kitchen, Reed poured water into a glass and stared out at the horizon. The house hadn't echoed with footsteps in 6 years. But tonight, it did, and he wasn't afraid. The next morning, the sleepy hum of Juniper Hollow began to stir. At Tomlin's general store, word traveled faster than the creak of the old screen door. A customer mentioned seeing Mara Ellison step out of Reed Ashford's truck. By mid-morning, 3 others had shared the tale, each one more twisted than the last. Inside the Thatcher estate, Judith sat at the head of the breakfast table, poring over her eggs with precision. "She's moved into Reed's house," Percy announced, scrolling through his phone. Someone snapped a photo. "She's wearing his shirt." Judith's fork paused mid-air. "Perfect. Let the town decide what kind of woman she is." Meanwhile, Mara walked into the general store with Luca. She smiled politely at the cashier, but the woman only offered a tight nod. A group of women by the canned goods fell silent. "Mom," Luca whispered, "why is everyone looking at us like that?" Mara knelt to meet his eyes. "Because they don't know us, sweetheart, but we know who we are." Still, her stomach twisted as she felt the weight of a dozen eyes carving her name into stone. Later that afternoon, as golden light bathed the Ashford ranch, a faded blue pickup rolled through the gate. Mildred Harlan stepped out, carrying a pie and a basket filled with homemade bread. "Thought you could use a warm meal," she said, smiling gently. Mara hesitated. "You don't have to." Mildred cut her off with a wave. "Hush. If I waited for perfect people to feed, I'd never cook." She entered the kitchen like it was hers, setting down the food, pulling out plates, chatting as if the silence in the house had never existed. Reed lingered in the hallway listening. Luca grinned through his first bite of cornbread. "This is amazing." Mildred winked. "I don't trust anyone who turns down a good biscuit." Reed stepped into the room at last. "Thank you," he said quietly. Mildred studied him. "It's good to see the lights on again." After she left, Mara turned to Reed. "She's kind," he nodded. "She's also the sheriff's wife." That mattered, more than either of them wanted to admit. By the next morning, Mara couldn't sit still. The anxiety of judgment was loud, but action, she'd always believed, was louder. She walked out to the dilapidated shed near the back of the barn. Inside, dust, broken chairs, and a cracked chalkboard leaning against the wall. "I could teach him here," she murmured. Reed, passing by with an armful of hay, paused. "You're really going to turn that thing into a classroom?" Mara looked over her shoulder, a spark in her eyes. "Yes." Reed dropped the hay. "I'll get tools." That afternoon, Ruby May, a shy 17-year-old from the neighboring farm, showed up with a rag and bucket. "My mama said you were a teacher," she said, cheeks flushed. "I'd like to learn how to help." Mara smiled. "You just did." By sunset, they had cleaned a corner, scrubbed the windows, and nailed the chalkboard to the wall. It wasn't much, but it was something. Reed leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Not bad." Mara wiped her brow. "You mean that? I wouldn't have hauled that desk in if I didn't." 2 days later, a letter arrived. Thick envelope, no return address. Reed handed it to Mara without a word. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, a formal petition. Judith and Percy were filing for custody of Luca, citing instability, homelessness, and unfit parenting. "They want to take him," she whispered. Reed clenched his jaw. "They won't." Mara blinked back tears. "They have money, connections, power. Have a barn and bruises. You have a voice, and you have me." That night, Mara didn't cry in front of Luca. She read him a story, tucked him in, and whispered, "You're safe." Then she sat alone by the kitchen table, staring at the petition. Her fingers drummed beside it like a war drum starting to beat. The next morning, Mara rose early. She made coffee, packed a small bag, and began gathering documents. Luca's medical history, school records, handwritten journals she kept to prove her care. Reed found her sorting papers, eyes burning with quiet fire. "You're not running," he said. She looked up. "No, I'm preparing." He nodded. "Good." She hesitated. "Do you want us to stay?" Reed stepped closer, placed a hand on the chair beside her. "You're not guests anymore. You're part of this place now." For the first time in weeks, Mara smiled without fear. In that moment, surrounded by old wood, dust, and rising hope, she realized she didn't just want to survive, she wanted to fight back. And maybe, just maybe, win. Finn Morgan stepped out of his dusty rental car onto Main Street, Juniper Hollow. The town looked like it hadn't changed in 30 years, except for the whispers, which grew louder with every step. His boots crunched on gravel as he entered the diner and slid onto a stool at the counter. "Coffee, black?" he told the waitress. He opened his leather-bound notebook and flipped to a page labeled Mara Ellison, Custody Scandal, Allegations, Land Ties. "New in town?" the waitress asked. "Just passing through," Finn said with a tired smile. "But I hear the stories here linger longer than the coffee." She gave a tight laugh and walked away. Outside, he began asking questions. At the post office, at the general store, at the church. Most people shut down the moment he mentioned Mara's name. A few muttered about Reed Ashford. One clerk whispered, "If you want the truth, talk to the girl they tried to erase." Mara met Finn at the back table of a small cafe just off the main street. She kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her voice cautious. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she said. "I just want the truth written down before they erase it." Finn nodded. "I don't record. I listen." She told him about Judith, about Percy, about the day they threw her out. She told him about the accident, about the Bluetooth call, the threats, and the mysterious vanishing of the car's dashcam footage. Finn didn't interrupt. He scribbled furiously. "You don't believe I'm lying?" she asked finally. "I wouldn't be here if I did." When they parted, Finn said softly, "You have no idea how many women I've met whose stories were buried in someone else's version of the truth." Mara swallowed, throat tight. "Then maybe you'll help me dig mine out." Finn stayed in town longer than planned. He visited the county records office, the land registrar, and even the old Thatcher estate survey maps. What he found chilled him. Years ago, land once owned by Reed Ashford had been transferred, without public notice, to a holding company connected to Charles Thatcher. The signatures didn't match. Witness lines were left blank. The notary had since retired and disappeared. He took the findings to Reed, who sat stone-faced, gripping the edge of the table. "They stole it," Reed said quietly. "My family's land. And now they're trying to take Mara's son." Reed stood. "Not anymore." Sheriff Amos Harlan sat in his office when Finn and Reed walked in. "I've known the Thatchers for 25 years, the sheriff said slowly, examining the documents. "But I also know forged contracts when I see them." Finn laid out a file. Falsified land records, timeline inconsistencies, and a witness statement from a former accountant who had been pressured by Percy. "I need to bring this to court," Finn said, "but I need you to stop shielding people who wouldn't flinch before breaking the law." Amos sighed. "This town doesn't like change." Mildred appeared in the doorway. "Neither did I," she said, "until I saw what it looked like to stand on the wrong side of a good woman." Amos looked down, then nodded once. "You have my cooperation." Back at the ranch, Mara stood in the makeshift schoolhouse, organizing papers and creating binders. Reed helped her scan Luca's medical files. Ruby May brought over handwritten letters from families Mara had quietly tutored. Mildred baked pies to deliver to potential character witnesses, because in Juniper Hollow, pie was stronger than politics. Finn visited daily, reviewing testimony, prepping questions, and building a timeline of corruption. "You're not going into that courtroom alone," he told Mara. "I never planned to," she said, glancing toward Reed, who was fitting new glass panes into the schoolhouse windows. Late one night, Mara stood on the porch, watching the stars. Reed stepped out beside her. "You scared?" he asked. "Terrified." she said. "But I'm also angry, and for the first time, I think that matters more." Reed reached for her hand. "You don't just deserve to win, you deserve to be heard." And under the pale glow of a desert moon, they stood shoulder to shoulder. Two people once broken by silence, now preparing to speak. The Shady Valley Courthouse stood like an aging sentinel, sturdy, quiet, but heavy with secrets. Inside, the wood-paneled courtroom buzzed with subdued whispers. Locals who had taken sides, some with the Thatchers out of fear, others with Mara out of principle, filled the pews. Mara entered through the side door, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing the only professional dress she owned. She clutched a leather folder of documents. Reed walked beside her, his presence solid and steady. Luca held Reed's hand with quiet pride. Across the aisle, Judith Thatcher sat in calculated poise, dressed in muted grey, with pearls that gleamed like armor. Percy wore a dark tailored suit and a smug expression, flanked by their attorney, a well-known litigator from Phoenix. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Keller, an older woman with stern eyes and a reputation for integrity, entered. The hearing had begun. The plaintiff's attorney started strong. "Mara Ellison is an unemployed woman living in a man's home with no legal connection to either him or the property. She has no permanent residence, no financial independence, and no formal custody claim over her son. Your Honor, Luca is being raised in instability." Mara sat still, heart pounding. Her hands stayed, folded in her lap. The lawyer paraded past disciplinary letters from Mara's old-school job, fabricated suspicions from her late husband's allies. He presented pictures of Mara at the ranch, suggesting inappropriate cohabitation. Judith whispered behind her gloved hand. Percy nodded smugly. Mara's stomach turned, but she didn't break. Then the attorney gestured toward Mara. "Your Honor, she may appear calm now, but we must ask, what kind of future can a child have with someone the town won't even look in the eye?" Judge Keller turned to Mara. "You may respond, Mrs. Ellison." Mara stood, her voice soft but steady. "I may not have much, but I have never stopped loving my son. I've raised him with respect, honesty, and safety. Three things I didn't find in the home I left." The room fell silent. For a moment, even Judith blinked. Finn stepped forward next. He submitted his findings into evidence. The judge flipped through land records, notarized forms, and financial transaction logs. The courtroom held its breath. "These documents," Finn began, "prove that the same people claiming Mara is unfit also orchestrated fraudulent land transfers and destroyed evidence related to her husband's accident, including dashcam footage and medical records." He presented a sworn affidavit from the former accountant Percy had pressured. "Your Honor, I believe this is not just a custody case, it's a cover-up. A cover-up to protect the Thatcher name and silence the only person still willing to speak. The truth." Judge Keller looked up, her expression unreadable. Percy's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the documents. Mara caught Reed's eye across the table. His jaw was tight, but his gaze held fierce pride. "Call Reed Ashford to the stand." He rose and walked slowly, each step echoing. On the stand, he looked directly at the judge. "I've known Mara for only a few months," he began, "but I've known grief longer than I care to. I watched her arrive at my ranch with nothing but a child in her arms and a spine of steel. I watched her teach that child math before he could stand without wheezing. I've seen what kind of mother she is. I would trust her with my life." He paused. "And I want to adopt Luca, not to replace anyone, but because he already calls me Dad, and I've never felt more like one." The room held its breath. Reed turned to Percy and Judith. "And they aren't trying to save that boy. They're trying to control a narrative they built out of lies." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Ashford, are you willing to assume legal and financial responsibility for Luca Ellison?" "Yes, with all my heart." The courtroom stood still as Judge Keller reviewed her notes. Then she lifted her gaze. "I've heard enough." Everyone leaned forward. "The court finds no evidence that Mara Ellison poses any threat to the well-being of her son." On the contrary, the testimonies and evidence confirm her as a devoted, competent, and loving mother. Judith paled, Percy's jaw clenched. Custody of Luca Ellison will remain solely with Mara Ellison. Furthermore, I am granting Reed Ashford legal stepfather status pending final adoption proceedings. A stunned silence followed. Lastly, she added, this court is referring all documents related to land transfer, falsification of evidence, and financial fraud to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A bailiff stepped behind Percy. Mr. Thatcher, please stand. As he was handcuffed, Judith stood and stormed out without a word. Mara couldn't breathe until Reed's arm wrapped around her and Luca ran into her lap, burying his face into her shoulder. You did it, Mama, he whispered. No, she murmured, holding him tighter. We did. In that moment, under the weight of justice finally served, the courtroom didn't feel like a place of judgment. It felt like a second chance. The desert evening rolled in, slow and warm, brushing against the Ashford ranch with a kind breeze. For the first time in months, Mara, Reed, and Luca sat together on the front porch, not to plan or fear, but simply to be. Luca sat cross-legged with a coloring book in his lap, occasionally glancing up at the horizon. Mara leaned back in a rocking chair, a soft half-smile on her lips as her knitting needles clicked rhythmically. Reed was on his knees near the steps, sanding an old shelf he'd pulled from the barn. I can't remember the last time it was this quiet, Mara said. Reed looked over at her. It's always quiet here. You just didn't hear it before through all the worry. Mara nodded. Maybe, but now it feels like silence with space in it, like it's okay to breathe again. Luca looked up. Are we going to stay here forever? Reed paused, then smiled. As long as you want. This is your home now, too. Luca beamed, and Mara reached for Reed's hand. The world beyond the ranch might not have changed, but inside these fences, a new life was already beginning. It started with a queasy stomach and an unexpected craving for strawberries. Mara dismissed it for days, blaming stress. But one morning, as she stood by the stove, the scent of eggs made her gag. She sat down hard, clutching the table. Reed turned from the sink. You okay? She didn't answer right away. I think I need to see Doc Avery. He narrowed his eyes. Are you hurt? No, I think I might be pregnant. The words hung there. Reed set the dish down slowly. Pregnant? She nodded, eyes wide. The silence stretched between them, then softened. Is that okay? She whispered. Reed exhaled, walked over and knelt before her. It's more than okay. He placed a hand over hers. We'll call her Grace. Tears welled in her eyes. Why Grace? Because that's what this is, he said. A kind of grace neither of us thought we'd get again. The schoolhouse stood nearly finished, a beam of sunlight pouring through the front windows. The chalkboard was clean, desks restored, and the smell of paint still clung to the walls. Ruby May arrived that afternoon, letter in hand, her eyes gleaming. I got in, she cried. Texas State Agricultural Sciences. Mara hugged her, laughing. I'm so proud of you, Ruby. You earned this. You believed in me first, Ruby said, voice thick. That changed everything. That week, the first children began arriving. 4 from neighboring farms, 1 from the edge of town. Word had spread that Miss Ellison was teaching again, and this time, everyone was welcome. Mara's voice filled the room as she guided little fingers through the alphabet. And in each child's eyes, she saw what hope looked like when it finally had a chance to grow. On a golden afternoon, Reed drove Mara and Luca up a winding dirt road behind the ranch. At the top of the hill lay 2 weathered gravestones, shaded by a lone cottonwood tree, Emily Ashford and Annie Ashford. Mara knelt first, placing a bouquet of wildflowers between the stones. I hope you don't mind us coming, she whispered. Reed knelt beside her, one hand on each of the graves. Emily, Annie, this is Mara. She's the woman who saved me. And this is Luca, who made me a father again. Mara turned to Reed, her breath catching as he stood and reached into his pocket. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply opened his palm, revealing a simple silver ring. "I don't need anything fancy. I just want you, all of you, forever." Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. "Yes, of course, yes." And as the wind stirred the branches above them, it felt less like goodbye and more like a blessing. Spring came early that year. Wildflowers blanketed the ranch, and sunlight filtered through the trees like gold. Mildred officiated the wedding in a grove near the schoolhouse. Finn stood beside Reed, adjusting his tie with awkward pride. Ruby held Mara's bouquet. Luca stood proudly as the ring-bearer, his suit slightly too big. The ceremony was simple, no fanfare, just truth. Reed's voice cracked as he said his vows. "You made me believe in life again," Mara answered with steady eyes, "and you gave me a place where I could finally rest." When they kissed, it wasn't the culmination of a fairy tale. It was a promise between two people who had been to hell and clawed their way back. As they turned to face their guests, hand in hand, Luca ran to them, laughing, grabbing both their hands. And for the first time in years, a family was born not from blood or name, but from love, freely chosen. The hand-painted sign above, the old tool she'd read, Whitmore Community School. Below it, the faded words, "Learn, Grow, Belong," were etched in small, careful letters by Ruby May. Inside, the school was alive. Children's laughter echoed off the wood-paneled walls. Mara stood at the front of the classroom, chalk in hand, her eyes lighting up as a student recited the alphabet. Reed peeked in through the window, holding baby Grace in his arms. The baby cooed softly as she watched her mother, unaware of the history her family had rewritten. One boy raised his hand. "Miss Mara, what does legacy mean?" She smiled gently. "It's something we leave behind, not money or houses, but the way we make people feel, the kindness we teach, the lives we touch." Behind her, a bulletin board read, "Your story matters." And this classroom, born from brokenness, had become the beginning of so many new stories. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky, Mara sat by the fireplace, baby Grace nestled on her shoulder. Reed reclined in his old armchair, Luca curled up beside him with a notebook in hand. "I finished my story," Luca said. "Can I read it?" "Please," Mara said, smiling. Luca cleared his throat. "It's called The Man Who Planted Grass But Grew a Family. It's about a man who lost everything in a storm. But when he planted seeds in dry soil, a little boy and his mom showed up. And instead of just grass, he grew people." Reed's throat tightened. Luca looked up. "You're that man." Mara blinked away tears as Luca handed the story over. "I wrote it for both of you." Reed put an arm around him. "You're the best thing I've ever helped grow." And in the quiet, with firelight dancing and Grace asleep in her mother's arms, the past no longer loomed. It simply faded, giving way to peace. The knock came unexpectedly. Mara answered the door to find Judith Thatcher standing alone, her once impeccable suit wrinkled, her eyes hollow. "I don't expect forgiveness," Judith began, her voice cracked with age. "I just wanted to say I was wrong about everything." Mara held the doorframe silent. Judith swallowed. "You reminded me of someone I once tried to be. I let envy and fear turn me into someone who hurt people. I can't undo it. But I wanted you to know, I see what you've built." Behind Mara, Grace giggled. Judith looked at the baby, then away. Mara didn't respond with kindness or cruelty, just quiet release. "I hope," Mara finally said, "you find something to grow too." Judith gave a small nod and left. Mara watched her go, no longer feeling small, only free. That weekend, the long wooden table at the ranch groaned under the weight of food and friendship. Ruby, home for spring break, set out fresh rolls. Mildred passed out napkins. Finn balanced a camera and a slice of pie. Luca ran through the kitchen with a wooden sword, Grace waddling behind him. Mara served the stew, smiling at the chorus of chatter. Reed raised a glass. To everyone who stayed, to truth, and to second chances. Laughter and cheers followed. Mara caught Finn's eye. "What will you write about next?" He tapped the framed story on the wall. Luca's. I think someone already wrote it better than I could. The meal stretched late into the night, and though the table wasn't expensive and the silverware didn't match, it was the richest gathering Mara had ever known. The photo on the mantel showed a much younger Mara holding Grace in one arm, Luca hugging her waist. Reed stood behind them, smiling shyly. Now, Luca, 18, and broad-shouldered, sat at his desk in the converted loft, pen in hand. He wrote, "Dear Mom, it's my 28th birthday. My wife is downstairs baking waffles. Grace just called to say she aced her first college exam. And me, I'm sitting here thinking about you. Not the hard years, but the moment you didn't give up. You held my hand on that roadside and never let go. You stood in court when no one else believed. You built a classroom in a broken shed and planted love in a man who'd forgotten how to smile. You made a family from dust. I want you to know I see you in every word I write, in every life I touch. You were never just my mother. You were my first teacher, my quiet hero, and I will spend my whole life making sure that story never fades. Love always, Luca." Mara stood in the hallway reading the framed letter. Her eyes glistened. From the kitchen, Reed wrapped an arm around her. "You okay?" She nodded. "I think I finally am." And outside, the sun rose over Juniper Hollow, not just on a town, but on the legacy of a woman who refused to disappear. When the dust truly settles, what remains? Is it the pain that tried to bury you, or the strength you found beneath it? Mara Ellison's story isn't just fiction. It's a reflection of every unheard voice, every mother forced to rise in a world determined to silence her. And what about you? Have you ever been pushed to the edge, forced to fight for your truth while others rewrote your story? Tell us in the comments. What would you have done in Mara's place? Or have you ever had to stand alone for someone you love? Your voice could be the one someone else needs to hear. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We share stories that reveal the power of truth, healing, and the extraordinary resilience of everyday people. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the harshest desert, something beautiful can bloom.